Hi, Sarah Potts here from Embed, and I'm really excited. We're going to be speaking today with Michelle Duval, and she is an individual who doesn't need an introduction. Everyone knows her, at least in Oceania and definitely in Australia. She is this kind of pioneer in the life coaching area. And just a complete and total inspiration. And I'm so happy that she is going to be here today as an act of professional generosity, where she is telling us her experience and her story, and literally giving us the gift of her example. So Michelle, how are you today?
I am delighted to be here, Sarah. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Of course. It's our pleasure. And so how are things? So spring is springing, as mentioned just a moment ago, here in Singapore. In Australia, that must mean that winter is descending.
We are in winter right now outside. It's drizzly and raining.
Okay. What part of Australia are you based in?
So I'm in Sydney and I'm near the iconic beach called Bondi. So I'm at another beach called Coogee, not very far from Bondi.
Oh, I love Bondi, and I love that ocean walk that goes through Manly Beach and goes through Bondi. That is an inspiration. What an inspiring place to live. So it's wonderful. Well, it's wonderful to have you today. And so let's just jump right into it. Tell us your story.
Well, I grew up in a very small country town, and at the age of 17, which was like finishing school, I had got in to study psychology at the most esteemed university in Australia for psychology. But at the very last minute, I deferred to join the first ever hotel management school in Australia. And at the time, it was the #1 hotel in Australia the study was attached to. Yes. And so I completed my study, and then I was only one of a few people to be selected to work in the hotel. And by the age of 23, I was responsible for 60% of the business in the hotel. And I was in a role and a position where I hosted and looked after big VIP delegations. And because we were the #1 hotel in Australia, everybody who was or a rock star or a politician would stay at our hotel, and I would personally host them. And so I had the very unusual experience at such a young age of meeting and spending time with some of the most elite in their fields. So spending time with and meeting like Richard Branson, Andre Agassi, Pavarotti, all these amazing different people. Yeah. And so it really was an extraordinary beginning to my career, because I was working with the most elite in the world. Yes. And at the same time, I was working with all of the people in the hotel who had to look after these guests. Yes. And these were people who had immigrated to Australia, most of them. They were doctors or engineers in their country, but because they wanted a better life in Australia, they thought, they were carrying bags or they were working in room service. And so it really, really irked me, because when I would see all of these people who'd achieved what they had in their life, they came with a massive entourage. And they would have incredible support, right? So much help. And I really got this feeling inside of me that I wanted to help everybody to have the same level of success that these people were having. So I left hotels. Yeah. I actually moved to your part of the world. I moved to Singapore. Okay. And I loved Singapore. I lived there for over a year. And I, at that time, got so unwell that I was not able to actually work for one whole year. And and during that time, I was so ill I couldn't get out of bed for longer than 5 minutes at a time before having to go back and sleep. Oh, and wow. And so during that time, I did what I called a PhD on myself, and got really into what drove me, what really motivated me, what did I want to do, and that was how I came to those conclusions to really help people. So I kind of made that decision that I wanted to help people. Yes. So I moved back to Australia and I started working in marketing. So I worked in what was known at the time relationship marketing. So I was working with CEOs and senior executives of large corporations and helping them to build closer relationships with their small to medium-sized business customers. Yep. And at the time, I was studying in the background various different forms of psychology to get ready to start this business that I wanted to create.
So you have a year in which you are unwell, right? In which it doesn't matter what your, mental fortitude is, okay? You are unwell and your body's literally saying, nope, you're going to rest. And so what you did is you took that time, because this is fascinating, okay? You took that time and said, well, I'm going to do a PhD on myself, right? PhD basically means I'm going to do some serious introspection. I'm going to learn what drives me. I'm going to learn my strengths. I'm going to learn things that get me excited, right? Or has an emotional response. Did you do that through any programs at all? Or was it just like meditation, introspection, etc.?
Yeah, no external support. It was all just purely myself. So I read a number of different books and was reading things that stimulated some of the things that I did. But I was so sick that I wasn't well enough to participate in any kind of a program. It wasn't even an option. I was actually in Singapore at the time. I had relocated there with my then partner.
Yeah.
And so when I got ill, we had actually broken up. So I was there in Singapore on my own. I was only 23. On my own, no money, no income, no job, no people, no friends, no family, nothing. Wow. And so it was exceptionally, to your point, exceptionally difficult. But I'd actually been unwell for 5 years prior to that, and no one knew what was wrong with me. And they didn't know how to cure what it was because they didn't know what it was. And so I had found a practitioner in Singapore who I had a lot of belief in. So that was why I stayed in Singapore on my own, going through all of that, because I wanted to be under her treatment. And so through the introspection, through the soul searching, through incrementally getting better and better and better and better, I got well enough to return to Australia.
And so then you get to Australia, you find a job, right? And it's in content marketing. What I find what's interesting about what you mentioned a moment ago is that you were very clear. And I think this is what's wonderful, as we talked about a moment ago, about how, people's experiences and life experiences are not linear. Everybody has their own story. And so someone, let's say, who is in a younger generation might be thinking, no, I have a job, and then I have to have a career, and then I have to do this, and then actually there are no have-tos. You took a year to do some serious introspection, and instead of getting down about your situation with your health, which would have been understood, despite the difficulty, you said, no, I'm going to stay here, and then at the same time, I'm going to maximize this opportunity. Then you get back to Australia, you get a job that you're not even thinking, hey, this is going to be a lifelong, career. Instead, you get a job with the understanding that you're going to enjoy the now, you're going to maximize the now in whatever employment you were in, while at the same time working on this passion project. I'm going to call it a passion project, something that you knew you wanted to do ultimately. And so, all of that is fascinating, because it takes a lot of personal drive and grit and discipline, more than motivation, discipline, to actually do this. So carry on. You're in this job while at the same time working on what your passion project was. Carry on.
And then I was working with all of these senior leaders, CEOs, and I was seeing that they were all working the ridiculously crazy long hours that I was working. And when I had been working in hotels, and I made the decision back then, this was many, many years ago now, I was only 25 at the time, made the decision that I would only ever work 4 days a week. And I had a philosophy that if everybody in the world only worked 4 days a week, there'd be more employment, more mental well-being, more physical well-being, people would be more collaborative, and I had this theory. So for over 20 years, I only worked 4 days a week, fulfilling that ideology that I had. But what really highlighted for me was the level of stress, disharmony, dissatisfaction, and unhappiness that so many people were experiencing in their work. So when I felt ready, I made the decision to start my own business. So I started the business, and I decided to call myself a life coach. And I'll never forget the moment. This is way back in 1996. In the internet was not, everybody listening today won't even remember that probably. Right. But back in that day, you didn't immediately Google everything because there wasn't that much information on the web. But I remember turning to a colleague who I didn't know very well, and for some reason shared with her my epiphany of a moment. And I said to her, do you know what? I'm going to call myself a life coach. And she said, you should Google that. I think there's something happening in the US around that. So I Googled it. Yeah. And this was 1996. And in 1994, the field of coaching emerged. And so I set up a coaching practice, registered a business name, and I became one of the earliest professional coaches in Australia and other parts of the world.